to do the thing where like we talk at you, and so we're going to create some space for questions and maybe even some shares, because we know that there's a lot of wisdom in this room, but there's certainly also a ton of wisdom on this panel, and I'm really grateful to be here with you all today. So today we're talking about the changing face of wellness, because you know, I was saying last night that I've been coming to Wanderlust for 10 years. I taught at the very first Wanderlust Festival, and I can vouch for how the face of wellness, even here, is really different, and it's affirming. To me, it's like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I do appreciate that, like, we can acknowledge that we're actually moving, that we're shifting, that more people are here, that different people are here, the conversations that we're having are more provocative. Yesterday we had a conversation called Wellness Beyond Whiteness, which has never happened here before, and this conversation, I think, is one of those too, that's really like up against the edge of like what it means to be well, and what we really need to be doing to democratize wellness for everyone. And these folks, yeah, you can snap to that. And these folks, these leaders, are really blazing a trail in their respective communities around how that's done. So we're going to get to learn from them today. We're going to get to learn from one another, and hopefully we'll be in a conversation together about not just what it looks like, but what it's going to take for all of us to be like the disruptors and the interveners and the radical change makers that transform our spaces into ones that work for everyone. So you are also a part of this movement of creating wellness for everyone, okay? You want to meet the panel? Yeah. All right, and now you're not in order of my sheet. It's gonna go like this. This is like my fourth panel. Dr. Chelsea Jackson Roberts. I always have to say that because I'm like, doctor. Freaking totally impressive. Is a yoga educator and founder of Yoga Literature and Art Camp for Teen Girls. She serves as a faculty member of Off the Mat Into the World. She is deeply committed to critically conscious ways of engaging the mind, body, and action in the world. And Chelsea is also a Lululemon global ambassador. And I'll just add my like note to that. Badass, disruptor, truth teller, and amazing human being. Can I just get a hand, please? Katie H. Willcox. What's H for?
Instagram. No, my last name was Halchisic, and that really confuses everyone, so everyone would just say Katie H. So when I got married, it just kind of...
Oh, I love that. Okay. I thought we were going to get some like, okay, but that works. Katie's the CEO of Natural Model Management, a thriving Los Angeles-based modeling agency that encourages models to be at a natural and healthy weight. She's author of the book, Healthy is the New Skinny, Your Guide to Self-Love in a Picture-Perfect World. She's using her 13 years of experience in the modeling industry to strive to change the game of body image by giving people the tools to challenge the beauty ideal implemented by the media. No small task, given what we know of the media these days.
No, definitely.
You're like up against a monster.
It's very difficult, and especially the conversation of health within the fashion spectrum where it's biased.
Yeah, so and we're going to dig into that because I have lots to say about that. Dan Nevins. Okay. Dan Nevins, renowned inspirational speaker and certified Baptiste Power Vinyasa yoga teacher. Is a mouthful. He shares his story of service on and off the battlefield, as well as the lessons he's learned in over a decade of post-injury as a combat wounded, bilateral amputee living with a traumatic brain injury. Dan is an advocate for the Wounded Warrior Project, which is his passion for helping fellow wounded warriors in any way he can. Dan recently founded his own nonprofit organization, Warrior Spirit Retreat, which is dedicated to healing the effects of combat stress using a curriculum based on yoga, mindfulness, and meditation. I met you, I think, 3 or 4 years ago at Wisdom 2.0, and I was in the main stage and I saw Dan speak with Congressman Tim Ryan and sort of like stalked him afterwards because he has so much to teach and so much to share and so much perspective to give, and I'm so grateful you're here. Michael James Wong. Michael James Wong is the founder of Boys of Yoga, Just Breathe, and the Sunday School Yoga, and the author of the recently released book, Sit Down, Be Quiet. I was with you when you were publishing that book, like literally in the moment. His teachings and organizations aim to create safe spaces for community, quiet, and connection all around the world. Welcome. All right, so my first question, this panel is called Changing the Face of Wellness, and I think we should clarify what we mean by face. I would love for all of you to answer this as like a baseline, and then we can kind of let the conversation emerge from there. So what do we mean by face? Like, what do we want to be changing? From what to what? From what to what? I'm just gonna...
Okay. For me, changing the face of wellness is really looking at what the face of wellness is right now and why that is, and we can't do that without looking at the system as a whole and looking at the ways in which we have been a part of, the separation and the division. And so with that can come not being well, with all that comes with feeling fractured or fragmented. And so for me, when I see changing the face of wellness, I see, an expanded variety of bodies and races and experiences and backgrounds being held and valued as someone who has knowledge and wisdom in how to be well. And so when we see a one identity, or two or three even, always being emphasized as the person who is well and who we want to, try to reach those heights, it sends another message of who doesn't have the right to be well.
I think even to touch on the exact same thing you're saying when it comes to image is so powerful in creating our belief systems. So if we can't see it, then we can't believe that that's an option for us. So now diving deeper into the manipulation of that and social control, which is one thing I've studied, and beauty ideals for women are the most powerful form of social control. So if you can only focus and see yourself as perfecting your body, it's never been about operating optimally. It's been about love, self-love, trying to get validation in your pursuit of wellness that you have never even tapped into because you don't feel valuable enough to pursue it. So it's also the space of in your own body, and all the things that happen to women in their bodies over a lifetime creates a disconnection as self-protection. So it's really returning back to a space where you can even show up to a wellness event and have that fortitude to be there, and then continuing that journey. So I think there's many steps of the process to reaching that place.
Yeah, and I just have to say too, I struggle, I don't struggle all the time, but I come up against this, like my old me, like the military version of me, growing up the way I did, that all this is weird. Like, it's, like, you guys are weird, we're all and so it's in that, and I don't mean weird bad, just weirdness is it limits access to people who just think it's not for them. And so well, if that's what wellness is and that's what the wellness space is, then it's not for me, and I guess I don't get to be well. Or it's they don't identify with wellness as like what we would identify with wellness as. And so they're like, well, I'm physically fit, or I'm not physically fit, and just changing the language and the dialogue. And I feel like my role in the veteran space is that I'm like a translator to break things down that I can learn and understand and digest, and give it back in a way that fits their culture and language, and then maybe that they won't be afraid or have the fear to show up here and be different or seen as different or broken or damaged or whatever that is.
And I totally agree with that, yeah. And I think our role within all of this, in this changing face of wellness, is to move the language in a new direction. I think wellness as a whole in the past decade or two, since it's kind of burst into the mainstream, it's always been positioned as an opportunity for gain, for growth, for financial, whatever it is, as opposed to bringing it back to the root of the community. What is the community involved in wellness now? What is the opportunity that underpins every single thing that we show up for? Because whether you like it or not, people are always selling people stuff in wellness. Actually, where's the community aspect of let's just be together, and maybe it's not even wellness we need to be doing, and just ditching that word and picking a new one.
Yeah, so I feel like what you're all naming is I mean, in ways like the way in which, like, so the image of wellness, right? We're talking about the systems of wellness, and we can all, I think, acknowledge that, like, in many ways, wellness has been co-opted by capitalism, it's been co-opted by white supremacy, it's been co-opted, right? Like, we are swimming in a culture that's putting forth a specific kind of image and saying, this is what it looks like to be well. This is what it feels like to be well. This is what it is to be well. And you're all kind of describing a version of that in a different way. And so what are those barriers to wellness, right? Like, let's like name them. Like, what's in the way of everyone being well? And I'll just open this up to the group as a conversation.
I personally feel it's judgment. So it's self-judgment, like we were saying, and then coming into a group and almost our preconceived ideas of what being spiritual or well is supposed to look like. So then we control our experience so that it can match what we have in our mind of how it should be and how we've seen them told it should be. And I think that that's been limiting on so many ways. And I told them the story yesterday. We did an eye gazing class. Never done that before. And we got a case of like the hysterical laughter, which was not the appropriate time for that to happen.
Or perfect.
Right. And I was like, to Nikki, I was like, do not look at me. We're having like a whole conversation, like I can't look over there. And I was crying, like convulsing by myself on the mat, not looking at anyone. And I'm like, this is like not the time to be, I'm supposed to be having this experience and I'm disrupting people. And I felt so good after that class. And we laughed again hysterically at night, telling my husband about it. And it was actually the highlight of my day. So it wasn't that I was like owning in those things. It was just the organic thing that happened that I really needed that actually like sparked, it was true to who I was. It was hilarious and I got so much from it. And so I think had I tried to control that to be like, I'm gonna talk really quiet and fit the narrative of what I've been told I'm supposed to do.
Conform.
Yeah, and that's conformity even in this space. And I think any type of religion or belief systems or spirituality, we tend to fear that we're doing it wrong. And so we do like, okay, put my hand up, I guess. Like, so staying true to yourself is like, no, it makes me feel uncomfortable, or it does make me feel weird. Cool, if that works for you, I'm not gonna do that. And creating your own space within the space that feels authentic, and it's totally okay to do that. So.
Yeah, just to add to that, and I think even what underpins what you were saying, Kerri, conformity, I actually think one of the biggest, I'm gonna say, issues that we have in wellness is expectation. We have breeded a culture that wellness expects things out of us, to live a certain way, to look a certain way, to feel a certain way. This gong should make you feel a certain way. Whatever it is, right? We're expected to have an output of whatever the well scene is, as opposed to actually just having an experience. We've moved experience into expectation, into a rapid ascension that has taken our own well-being out of it.
Well, and I'll add a dimension to that. Not only is it an expectation, but there are people benefiting from are not being good enough and are not having the correct kind of diet or experience or feeling, or right. So there's also a marketplace that I think benefits from what you're naming is kind of the opposite of wellness.
Yeah.
And that feels important to name too.
Adding to that, I feel like one of the barriers is also the expectations, and then also placing a one-size-fits-all onto everyone in their wellness, and like there's this just one definition for wellness, and that's what we're unpacking right now. And for me, that barrier exists in this body, for me, of not having the acknowledgement of how it can differ for me, how my wellness may take even more work because of the conditions that happen when I step outside of the yoga space, or even when I'm inside of a yoga space that's deeply related to my identity. And so that varies for each person in here. Mine, specific to my race, to my body type, to my access in the beginning, and now I'm having more and more access. And so for me, it is the understanding that wellness looks different for everybody, and that we live in a country specifically that have people who are not well, and is deeply related to a system that continuously and has been oppressing communities since the beginning of time. But the good thing is that we have this tool that we can use, but it can only be used when we're realistic and honest about the conditions that people have to face each day. And so for me, a barrier of wellness is if I go to a space of wellness and that is not seen. If I go to a space of wellness and that's not acknowledged. If I am on a panel or teaching and it's not acknowledged that it was hard work for me to just even get here and the traveling of it, that impacts my wellness. And so for me, the barriers are not looking at the whole picture and people's access to wellness.
Well, and I think that's an important distinction to lift up, that some of what we're talking about are the individual choices that we make about what's happening on the inside, and some of what we're talking about are the external conditions, right, that are designed to keep some people out of wellness and some people in wellness.
And how we participate on both sides of that.
That's right, and we're always all participating internally and externally.
Yeah, and considering just like what Dr. Schultz was saying, that wellness looks different for everybody, and I feel like one of the barriers is that the invitation isn't really present in a lot of communities, especially looking at the veteran community. There's such a disparity between like a war fighter culture, which like we're fighting wars right now, and then like the notion of ahimsa and what that means, and the difference and the separateness in those communities, that the invitational almost isn't present. And then so that's definitely a barrier. Like when I look at like my community, which, and my community is everybody, but when I focus on the people that I'm trying to help the most, like yeah, they don't feel welcome. And then the invitation isn't there. They feel like, well, not only that you guys are weird, you guys think I'm weird. And so like that's, and you know, I don't know the answer to how to fix that or bridge that, but.
I want to dig in with that because I've heard you say that the first time yoga was introduced to you, you were like, hell no.
Oh yeah.
Like hell
no. Dude, I want spandex.
and so your respective community are wounded and returning veterans. And I imagine that you must get that response all the time when you're like, hey, hit the mat with me. So how, like, what have been the ways in which you've discovered that you can bridge people or like invite people in a way where they feel safe and welcome?
Exactly. Well, it's because I had to trick them at first. I do.
You're gonna take notes. We're gonna trick.
Right. It's a hook. It's a hook. Yeah, that's a better word. You know, I have because I have the ability, being one of them, right, to stand and say, oh, you're scared to try yoga? Like, what is it about it? And I'm like, well, like, oh, it's not for me. I'm like, oh, so that I'm different than you, so I can play that sort of like using the language and the culture of the military, exploit those similarities in our language and culture to get them to show up. And then once they show up, it's like, I don't even have to teach. Any one of the yoga teachers in the room or up here could teach and they could still get it and see, like firsthand, that the experience isn't what they thought it was. And then slowly, once they recognize that they don't have to feel excluded, that just kind of breaks off that outer layer of the shell, that protective, like, well, I'm a warrior and I'm this and I'm that, and all these, the identity I've created for myself as a badass who shoots guns and eats meat and doesn't think, you know, like that. Actually, I have more in common with these people than I thought I did.
Yeah, and I think that I just want to name like the trick part. Like I do think there's a skill in what you're naming that isn't manipulation, but rather meeting people where they are. Right, like really acknowledging like where people are and not where you want them to be.
Exactly.
And meeting them there, and creating a gateway and a doorway for them.
And an invitation from the heart. Like, just like I can say, like I say, I swear with these people, like, you know, like this is what I do.
Yeah.
And though in that there's love, and that's the one thing, there's misperception about the military that a lot of people who've never been or don't have family that are involved is, you know, there's anomalies everywhere, but for most of the people that I know that have served, they do it because of love. Like ultimately, they're doing the very best of humanity and showing up and inflicting violence on behalf of a cause or what they're told is right or what they feel is right. And so ultimately, they know what it's like to lead with love. It just doesn't look like it. And so like that's when the invitation comes from love and connection, like they get it, they understand it, it just still feels and looks weird.
It lands, right, but it lands in a different way, right, and maybe they pay attention.
Absolutely.
Katie, and I also, by the way, curse at people with love. Katie, so I don't even know how to wrap my head around what you're doing, because you are disrupting the culture of beauty and body image that literally the industry of yoga and wellness is built on.
Yeah.
Right, and so like the paradox of that makes my head spin a little bit. And there, like we mentioned, like Michael mentioned, like there's a lot of reinforcement for a kind of body image or a kind of beauty or a kind of even like apparel wearing and a kind of skin color and a kind of gender, right? Like there's a lot of reinforcement in our media and the pictures and the culture that that is being created from the industry. And I just want to keep saying that, like that. It's actually not coming from the people. It's actually coming specifically from an industry. And so how do you negotiate that, right? How do you facilitate that contradiction for people that like they are both in that community and disrupting it at the same time?
Well, I think there's so many layers. So we have to like start peeling back the layers, because on the surface, what we teach about body image is look in the mirror and just say you love yourself. And you're like, okay, well if we don't have the knowledge and the information to understand the system that forces us to hate ourselves, just saying the words I love myself does nothing, and then we are failing and back in the system of self-loathing. So it's really challenging that. I started to look into the history of how people think and who controls how we think. And the definition of a sense of self was mind-boggling to me. It's if a person doesn't know who they are, but they always know who they think they are. And I was like, wait, let me think about that again. I don't know who I am, but I always know who I think I am. So who's dictating who I think I am?
Yeah, that's right.
And like that started taking me down this rabbit hole of like aliens in the universe. No, I'm just kidding. Of really uncovering why we're here and going, what is this? Who's telling me I can't be in my natural form? And so I understood that what the beauty ideal is actually a symbol. So these ideal bodies in yoga and these ideal bodies in the media and models are symbols. What are they symbolic of? What do we get if we look like that? And if you break that down, it's pretty simple. So we're taking body image from an emotional, hurtful place to a rational place. Go, oh, they tell me if I look like that, I get success, I get love, I get attention, I get followers, I get to do things I really want to do, and I get to be validated as a human. Who in here would like that? It's a normal human desire. But we live in a society where it's not safe to be open about those things, so we repress them. Now taking in social media on top of it, we can't show who we really are, so we're going to face-tune our bodies and post that, because we're going to get more likely to get likes, followers, validation, the things that we want within. So that's when it comes into the yoga space to say, we are smart people and we are very good at bullshitting ourselves. And I'm very guilty of that as well. And I have started to see, when we started our body image company 10 years ago on social media, it was new, no one talked about it. That's why we got a big following. And it took a shift where it went from, let me talk about these important issues, to let me show my body. And that's where the conversation shifted, to go, oh, well, yes, that was a form of rebellion, to be like, I'm going to be brave and do something no one was doing and take all this ridicule for being like, if you don't like it, don't look. Can be empowering. That also can be manipulated to, I want the likes, the validation, whatever. And so when I see the yoga community and I see girls in thongs doing their yoga poses with their booties up in the camera, I'm like, what's happening right now? What is going on? And then there'll be a whole disclaimer about, I'm doing this because I'm free and I'm this. And at some point, we have to call BS and not participate. Not judge, to say, I see what this is where they're at in the process, this isn't for me.
What does not participate look like? Is it, because I want to be clear that like, I think we also have a call out culture in like wellness too. So like, what does it mean to kind of like, to boycott or to opt out?
I educate. So instead of judging that person, because again, everyone's on their journey of understanding that for themselves, and some people they actually believe it. So they think, oh, I'm believing these things they're saying, so to come in on their page, it's their page. Who am I to come in on their page and say, don't post that, that's just crazy behavior. I just don't go to their page. And then using that as a conversation to say, how are you guys feeling about this? Let's talk about it. Let's hear from other perspectives. Some people are comfortable with it, some people aren't. But you're giving people permission to decide for themselves what rings true. And then to go, cool, you do your thing. I now know what direction I'm going to take on my page. And I'm going to do that boldly without fear of being unfollowed. And that's how you step into your power. So all of that has a ripple effect outward. You don't have to attack someone. You just have to be what you saw in them that didn't ring true to you. Be more of that. And that's kind of the approach that I take.
Chelsea, you and I have talked about this. And
have a voice to come back against us if we aren't representing people in a fair and just way. Causes a shitstorm for them on social media. They're like scared because they're going, I need to hire you instead of that influencer because you're giving my brand depth and you're reaching an audience that we want as customer. So you have to keep in mind that you might not have the most followers, but your message is important and it's valued in a deeper way. And so fighting that internal struggle, like, oh, I need that mass validation, it's not. Like, that's the people paving the way, the ones that are like, this is the truth. And if you don't like it, that's okay. But brands and companies are now going, oh my God, we have to have this representation. And they're getting the right people.
And I'll add another layer to that because I do think that there's also a practice of tokenizing for a company.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that, Kerri. Yeah. Because that's when it becomes the fine line and you want to make sure that it is an exchange. So if I'm being invited to be the face of something, then I know that I have to also come with an ask at the table. I'm not going to be tokenized. I'm not going to allow somebody to use my body, my likeness, in order to push an agenda that actually is against everything that I stand for. And so it may not look perfect in the process. It takes time. Like, it took hundreds of years for us to get in a situation where people are being excluded. So honoring that and seeing that and using our practice, going to that, and then also being unapologetic about the asks that we have. And when it's not just about you, it's not just about me, it's about my community, it's about the girls who we serve. And so when I know that I'm leading with that, then I'm unapologetic about what I'm asking for, and all they can say is no. But at least the conversation has happened.
Well, and I think that's a real, thank you for saying that, because as we, I know there's a lot of conversations in this community around diversity and inclusion, which we decided in the panel last night to stop using entirely. But in that, as we build those relationships, it's relationship building more than anything. It has to come, relationship has to be at the center and trust has to be built, and power has to come. Right, with those relationships, not just likeness, but actually listening and giving power, right, to the folks who are underrepresented in your media or in your company. Michael.
I was just going to add to that, and I think we all have felt that and feel that in different aspects of our industries and communities. And I mean, speaking from where I come from, I mean, if you think about it, my stance on it is the biggest reason that guys and men aren't in the yoga and wellness space is because for the past 20 years, we couldn't sell yoga pants or yoga mats to anyone. Right? A brand, Dan and I, didn't fit the mold to sell some pants and some yoga mats, so therefore there was a disconnect of how it got brought into the mainstream awareness. I think it fundamentally comes from a space that actually in wellness, there's an increasing epidemic of a quick fix, or trying to resolve something with a single-minded answer. You feel like this, do this thing. You do this, come to this treatment. Do this, come to this class. And actually where we negate the conversation is wellness is a willingness to do work. To put in work for yourself, for your communities, for the conversation. But actually we tend to have this sensibility that wellness is easy to fix with this thing that you buy, or this thing that we go to, or this feeling that we get once, as opposed to day in and day out, a grind of your own work internally from whatever the conversations that you're in, dealing with, facing, or supporting.
Well, and I imagine that in some way you have your work cut out for you in who you're organizing, because the lineage of yoga comes from men, actually, right? And yet, ironically, in a Western yogic culture, it's predominantly women. It's 80% or something women, I think. And so I love what you're doing with Boys of Yoga, and there's a paradox there, right? Because it's one of the few spaces that's not dominated by men, right? So I'm almost curious, how do you reconcile that? I don't even know what I'm asking, but how do you reckon with welcoming more men into the culture of yoga, but also acknowledging that in our dominant system, men are actually always on top?
Absolutely, and I think Dan and I will answer this both as well. And I think the way that I talk about it and the way that I write about it is that we live in a system where we're always living by definitions, regardless of what we do. And actually, we've upheld some sort of definition to a male's role in society and well-being and how it comes to fruition. The way that I break it down with the sense of a man's role in wellness is to be mindful, aware, and non-judgmental. And actually, and I'll tell you a funny story. I was actually, because I'm from London, or not from, I'm from LA, but I live in London. And actually I was at an event with Dave Chappelle earlier this week. And the funniest thing, only because of, it's not like, it's just more of like, one of the most inspiring things I've heard in a very long time is that he said, right now, and he was talking about the general Western side, we live in a culture of smooth talkers and not enough good listeners.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. You know, what I think is great is the way this is unfolded here in the West is that it is heavy on female, because now I mean, my goal is to bring more men into this so we can shut up and listen more, and be like, and actually be all on the same team of trying to actually change the way it is. And for me, like we get into these conversations on race and gender and all these things, and I know like in my place, in my natural expressions, I've always like been in leadership, and so like my natural, what I want to do is sit up and say something, and I just have learned to just sit down and shut up, and so like I can actually learn and grow, and then share that with other men, and then maybe they get invited to space so they can also sit down and shut up and learn and grow, and then all move forward on the same page together, as cliche as it sounds.
I'll just add one thing, just because I think it supports absolutely what Dan said, and I think as a culture with men, I only speak for myself, and the way that I've experienced in my life is that we have this tendency to try to solve every situation all the times and come into this space. I teach from a place where we try to bite-size our messages very simply so everyone can understand, and we break it down, or I break it down with wellness. If you were to define that as an acronym in itself, it's we need to listen and learn and not expect to solve every situation.
That's good.
I'd like to add to that as well, because I deal with a lot of college-age girls, and I did a talk recently, and there were 400 girls that came to my talk, and I was like so excited, and we were talking about the relationship on campus between young men and women and how toxic it is. It's not, it's so separate. We had this conversation yesterday about how sad it is how many great friendships we've all missed out on, because it's always been like we are trying to attain something from each other. So for young girls, the self-esteem is so low that we enter into these relationships that are traumatic to our bodies, to our well-being very young, and it's men and women think very differently, and we've had this like very hilarious conversation about it yesterday. But at that same college, they had a conversation about toxic masculinity, and 9 boys showed up. So I had 400 girls showing up to 9. And I think that's where we're at right now, is women are showing up. And they're saying, I want to work on myself. I want to be better. I can tell something's wrong. I'm like stepping back into that place of lifting. And it's not our responsibility to require men to do the same, but it shouldn't dictate where we continue to go. And that is the thing. When we decide to no longer lower our standards, say, you're not coming with me, that's okay, but I'm no longer staying in this space, that's when everything will have to change and shift together. So it's not a blame, and we talk, as women, we always go, oh, that's my fault. I shouldn't have done that. I should have done this differently. I shouldn't have gone in that room. I felt weird. It's my fault. We do that all the time.
When Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the great notorious RBG, was asked how many women need to be on the Supreme Court before it will be enough, do you know what she said? 9.
There you go.
9 for the last couple hundred years has been all men. 9 women can be on there. So I think that's really wise. And
or even further with Anita Hill to say, well, on the reverse, with the Kavanaugh situation, what if his state was all women of color? What would the outcome have been? Like, these are,
this is the water that we're swimming in. And I think there's great wisdom coming up, especially from what you were just naming around, like part of like what I believe yoga and wellness calls us to cultivate is self-awareness, but the kind of self-awareness that's not just individual, that's social and proximal, right? And knowing like our proximity and our social location to access and to power and to privilege, and having that dictate how we show up. And I just really loved how you modeled, like, we step back, we get quiet, we listen, we learn. And I think that there's a lesson for all of us who have identities that are associated with dominant culture. You know, it's not just about the patriarchy. It's if you're white, if you're, cisgender, if you're heteronormative, if you're able-bodied, right? Like if you have any of those identities that are considered normal, in our dominant culture, the cue, I think the signal in terms of how we practice creating more equanimity is to lean back, right? And to make space and to get out of the way. And so I just wanted to like lift that up because I think that's a really important practice that's being named on this panel. I want to talk a little bit about how we do this work with skill and consciousness and respect, because one of the things I really appreciate about how you all are modeling bridging is that you're doing it within your own communities, right? You are of your own community, and I think that there is a pattern sometimes in yoga service of people going into other people's communities to do service, and to fix things or to make things right or to bridge some injustice. And yet I understand, and a little of this was talked about in the panel yesterday, that real skill in doing this work actually requires us to like look to the leaders within those communities to actually be doing this work and like give them money and support them and trust them. So I just want to ask you about that in terms of like, what are the skills that we need to be employing as we think about how we can be of service in changing the face of wellness and democratizing well-being for everyone. It's open to the group.
I'll go for it. I think one of the common themes I see, especially with the social media, is I just had a woman write me yesterday and go, I want to ask your opinion about this relationship, and she said this whole story, and I said, you already know the answer, are you just wanting me to confirm what you already want to do? I was like, and she wrote back, she's like, oh, I had a feeling you were going to say that. So I think that's what it is when we talk about spirituality and wellness, we say the saying, like, your vibe attracts your tribe. They're like, yes and no. Like, maybe we're drawn to people that are like, I like your style, or like, you're cool. But if you're going to a spirit level, you're attracted to people that are so greatly different than you, that are not your vibe at all. You just connect on this level that you're like, this isn't anything. I know you from somewhere, and it's probably not here. So that's a weird element that comes into it. So there's lots of different ways in which we connect to people, and we want to see ourselves reflected in them. And we have to recognize when it's our physical reflection we want to see and when it's something deeper. And that's something I try to do and have those conversations by using those platforms to empower people to know, like, I'm no different than you. I spend all my time saying that over and over. So people are like, the greatest compliment I've ever got. You're just like you are on Instagram. I'm like, that's the best compliment I could have ever gotten. Because in this space, I've met too many speakers, too many smooth talkers, A personalities, great performers that were so disappointing in real life.
So be who you are, like be vulnerable.
Just be a kind person. Like if people, it's weird that people follow people, right? Because you're like, that's weird in general. And then the system supports that even more. So it's like, how can you're given the opportunity to engage with someone and have that platform, not to be like, hey, here's my book. Oh, hey, here, buy my online course for $3,000 you probably don't have. You know, like that really bothers me.
Build real relationships.
Build relationships, and also, how can we make this content accessible for free? You know, to say it doesn't, like, if we have means of caring for ourselves and our families that we don't have to sell the knowledge that will save people's lives, how can we put that out there instead of our ego being like, this is my message? Because I have that, like, I've struggled with that too. Someone's gonna steal it, someone's gonna do that. And I'm like, it's not mine, I didn't come up with this, I learned it.
Yeah.
And I'm teaching it. So the best thing I could hope is that someone came to my presentation, learned it, and they're gonna go teach it to the girls in their family.
Yeah.
So it's like letting
Let
that
go.
go, to be like, this doesn't belong to us, we're just sharing it. And the more we can share, the further it spreads, which is important.
Well, and especially since so much of this isn't ours to begin with, right? So yeah, great best practice.
Yeah, and it's like, I find, like, you look at like my following, that I have a lot of this military culture, and it's like about like-minded people, and that's great. And so as a leader in that space, I can translate, and but the message has to be about, like, but you're not special, and you're not different, actually. And so, like, to open it up to everyone, and every color, religion, race, and background, and so, like, it's the it's great to have people inside of communities be leaders, and so, sort of like where like you already have inherent trust, and it's already kind of built, and there's an expectation that you're on the same page and on the same team, on the same side, and build in the conversation, because that can tend to get like really like I'm powerful in this space. And then you can start to believe that and like, you know, feed your ego and everything else, but then it has to be like, as leaders in our respective communities, it has to be about, and though you're not different or special, like, and though it's the whole world together, it's every skin color, it's every race, it's every, however people identify, whatever that is like it's all perfect because we're all human beings in the end.
I love that. How do you pick your head up and acknowledge that we're a part of something bigger than ourselves?
I think you said it, Kerri, when you said also look into the community with whom you want to work and see if there's someone already there qualified to do the work and supporting them in that. And my teacher, Tracy Stanley, says you cannot teach what it is that you don't practice. And so for me, that is key to understanding my position and responsibility as a yoga teacher, that I'm constantly unpacking my own unconscious bias. We talk about this a lot throughout the Man in the World, and Sean even mentioned it yesterday, that if I'm not addressing the things that I'm holding within myself that's unconscious, and I'm making assumptions about my students or saying what they need before asking them what they need, then that is a mistake, right? And so if we take the time to really get to know the communities and where we're working, because yoga, one of the components is seva, karma yoga, service, outreach, and there's a huge wave of outreach happening in the last decade where people are doing damage because they're not taking time to understand the communities that they're working in and not taking the time to build the relationships, which takes time. Just like my yoga practice takes time. And so I always encourage people to remind yourself as you're doing work out into the world to always have that yoga practice as your guide for your checks and balances in order to keep you focused on what it is that you're doing in the first place. Because the last thing we want to do is create harm in places where we want to not have harm and for people to be well.
Well, and I think the question of like, am I the right person to be doing that service is an important one, right? Or is it someone else?
Right. And when it's insecurity and doubt versus ego, like those are different.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people that are so gifted and they don't have the confidence to be like, well, why am I'm not special enough to be giving information. I'm not up on a stage. And then there's the opposite of that too. So it's like understanding, being true and real with yourself to know like you're all good enough to be teaching. You don't have to be right here, right now to turn to the person next to you and share a powerful experience.
Well, and that goes back to like the inner and the external. Like there's inner parts and external parts. Michael.
I was just going to add to this and say, I mean, I was always taught to believe that none of us are more powerful than all of us. And I think, especially in this type of community, we're built on individual leadership or teachers, which is fantastic, and that's needed. But actually, it's not about who needs to say it, it just needs to be said. Who needs to be work? The work just needs to be done. If you know, I know a lot of you guys are yoga teachers. If you take it back to the actual teachings of it, we all come from this place of karma and love and giving this sense of support and service. But even when if you drill down into the actual semantics of the literature, there's a difference between sakam karma, which is the sense in which we give service with still a slight expectation. Please say thank you. Please tell me I'm good. Please tell me that I did something well. Versus nishkam karma, the sense of selflessness with absolute no need for return. Yes. And when you function in this community, like it or not,
I'm curious to the panel.
I don't doubt that from you.
I wanted to name, like, is there a mandate for wellness? So what I mean by that is, so I'll put it in the construct of the social media. It's like, okay, for a body positive person to stand up and be like, like I'm health at every size and I'm fit, right? And then someone to say, well, as long as you're healthy. Like, it's good for you as long as you're healthy. Well, what does that mean? Are we saying that everyone must be well in order for them to be valid?
And what the hell do we mean by well? I mean, we had this conversation last night with Anasa Troutman, and now I wish she was in this room. And she's not. But one of the things that we talked about, which I think is radical, and I think a lot of you have already acknowledged this, is that wellness looks different for different people, and actually people get to be self-determined in how they define what is well for them. and it shouldn't ever be determined by someone outside of them. And actually, if we shift to that perspective, then we have to change the game completely and break the table, apparently, is what we decided yesterday. We're gonna break the table. But so that, I'll add that, and then I'll just open it up to the panel.
I just want to add, actually I want to slightly, I don't actually think anymore, I think with wellness we don't need to define it, we just need to design it. And rather than smash the table, we just need to build something or anything that is designed in a way that serves us individually and stop living by definition or whatever perception of definition might be, or the bits and pieces of definitions that have been gathered. You know, it's kind of like when you like move into a house and over 10 years you just gather a bunch of crap and then that's kind of your house, as opposed to...
You inherit it.
Yeah, you inherit it, it comes with it, it gets sent in the mail, and someone goes, here's a gift for you, and you know, I don't really want this, but now it's at my house. Why can't we just move house, start fresh, and design the space that works for us?
And I think that's part of breaking the table, right? Is like disrupting those external coding, but like actually allowing for individual self-determination, right? While addressing the systems that are collectively designed.
Well, I mean, it's a really great question because it's like, yeah, well, what is wellness? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And I know for me, it changes all the time. So as long as we're just actively staying in the conversation about making the opportunity for well-being and wellness for everyone, and whatever that looks like individually, so like that's really the goal. So whether it's smashing a table or moving a house or building something or whatever, it's just as long as we're engaged. And all of us together engage on what that is for me, like what it is for me. Like in a conference like this, my well-being is being nurtured and enhanced by just listening. And coming from a place that I don't really know anything, and I learn more. Like Kerri, you mentioned earlier, like I don't know my like racist tendencies and my like I live as a white man my whole life, and apparently I'm the devil, and it's fine. You know, but like that's I know, like you know, no, it's like no, but
you're learning. You're learning.
Yeah, well, like,
and you're unlearning.
Yeah, and that's more that. It's like my wellness, my well-being is being enhanced by like me being aware to what I need to unlearn and then where I need to learn.
And just a quick add on that, when it comes to bodies, what I've found, because I've seen the whole spectrum and the whole debate on every end, and it's not even about wellness, it's about pain. So we focus so much on like, oh, if I could just do this and I can just do that, but you haven't even addressed the pain that is stopping you from achieving those things. So I stopped that a long time ago of trying to like, what am I eating and how many yoga classes am I doing in my morning ritual and all of that, and I just start to focus on healing the sides of me or the experiences that stop me from progressing in life. So that's a much more realistic approach, and you find yourself just slowly moving into a better space without the expectation.
Just bring it home.
I probably am going to go in a different direction to bring it home, and that's just to
That's why I love it.
Yeah. Again, bringing it back to Tracy Stanley, we cannot teach what we don't practice, right? And we need to continue to remind ourselves why we kind of came to this practice in the first place. And speaking for myself was to be whole, and if we're going to truly feel whole in this world, then we have to unpack the things that keep us detached and fragmented.
Yeah, that's right. And that's like one of my favorite like benchmarks to you, or what did you use? Mandate? Is wholeness. Like, what if wellness is just to be whole and we get to define that for ourselves? And it's also interdependent, right? So like we don't get to like be whole and actually isolate ourselves from the wholeness of our community and our society and the well-being of everyone. It's actually mutual, right? Our liberation, our wholeness, our well-being is bound up with one another. And so like maybe we leave with that question, like what does it mean to be whole? And how do we get to determine that for ourselves? And what does it look like to fight for that for one another? And we'll just like end it on that note. So can I get a round of applause?